Hello and welcome back to our daily blog. For the next few days we will be examining parables which use slaves and their masters as the backdrop for their stories. These are often quite difficult to hear as a modern Western audience, as slavery is so far removed from what we are familiar with. But as with all the parables, we must look at them in their context. Slavery has such a bad connotation in the West, as the slave trade of the colonial period was so harsh and cruel, and the abolition of this practice took a lot longer than it should have. However, we must remember that in the time of Jesus, slavery was a fact of life, particularly for those lands conquered by the Roman Empire. Romans would conquer an area and take back slaves. These slaves would then be bought and sold as property. And, as all property, how it is treated depends upon who owns it. But masters would do well to treat their slaves well, as well-fed and happy slaves work harder. Now, if a slave worked hard for their master, they had a chance to earn their freedom. As a freedman, they could then be employed as servants, but of course would then need to be paid a wage, or were at liberty to make their livelihood in another capacity. Many of Jesus' parables reference slaves and servants. The main difference between them is that slaves were property of their master and servants were paid employees. Today we will be focusing on the parable of the watchful slaves in the Gospel of Mark. But about that day or that hour, no one knows except for the Father, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son. See that you are vigilant, because you don't know when the moment is. Just as a person on a trip away from home leaves his house and gives authority to the slaves and work to each one, and commands the doorkeeper to be watchful. Therefore be watchful, for you don't know when the Lord of the house will come, in the evening, or at midnight, or at cockcrow, or at dawn, in case he comes suddenly and finds you sleeping. What I am saying to you, I say to everyone, be watchful. That's from Mark chapter 13, verses 32 to 37. Now, although Matthew and Luke both have passages that are very like this one, mentioning keeping watch and not knowing the hour, Mark's is the only gospel that includes this mini parable involving slaves whose master has gone away in this form. So this parable is clearly telling us to be vigilant. We don't know when something is coming, but we must be on the lookout for it. Be watchful. Be ready. But for what? There are three basic schools of thought. Theologian Tom Wright has theorised that Jesus was referring to the Jewish people being ready for the destruction of the temple in AD 70, that they should be ready for what was coming. Perhaps the most popular theory is that Jesus was referring to his own return, known as the parousia, or colloquially as the second coming. However, as Paula Gooder points out, that theory is becoming more challenging as time passes. In the parable, it is told as though the master will be returning soon. Yet, 2,000 years later, we are still waiting. Lastly, Jesus could have been speaking eschatologically about the end times, when heaven and earth become one. However, Paula Gooder favours a different interpretation, that Jesus wasn't speaking about one specific moment or event, but a whole series. I like this theory. After all, life is not made up of one specific event. It is made up of millions of moments, all of which make us who we are. God is in each one of these moments, if we choose to see him. I believe that we should be vigilant all the times that we see God at work in our lives. Be vigilant that we see him. Even when we don't think he is there watching us, he is, and we should be watchful for all the moments that he gives to us. I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.